Welcome to the Strong Nights, Calm Days podcast. I am your host, Andy Clark, and we are diving today into Beyond the Grades, decoding report cards for kids with big emotions. This is a fascinating one. I got a new desk and I have been cleaning things out and went through my whole office closet and I found a whole bunch of my old report cards. And as I was going through them, I was really reconfirmed as to how far I've come in understanding them. The lens that I look at the report cards is so different now that even if I was to go back a couple of years with my kids' report cards, the lens I would have read them at and the comments from that teachers would have made, I would have heard so different and been able to help my kids at such another level. Or I know for me as a child, there's things that could have been done to have helped me, that my hope today is that going over my report cards, helping you with understanding some of my kids and stuff, is that you will be able to look at your kids' report cards through a very different lens and maybe be able to find some of the hidden stressors for them, things that are maybe going on. So if you are somebody who homeschools, like I do now, you will definitely benefit from this as well, because things that you will see, you'll be noticing things that would, if they were in school, probably be written in a report card, but you'll actually be seeing firsthand as you're helping your child, probably even more in depth, because you have that intimate relationship in helping your child at home. So you'll really, really be able to resonate with this. So let's dive in. So there's two things I want to go into. First was my feelings when I started going through these report cards. I loved school, absolutely loved school, except for grade 5. Grade 5 was tough. And that teacher, I felt, hated me. That teacher, that is when I felt stupid in that class. I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And it's one of those things where, when you kind of like imagine, I don't know. When I was little, I used to kind of imagine what these teachers' lives were like outside. Never did I think they had family and kids. But I always imagined this one teacher lived in this really decrepit, dark house, like you'd see in like horror movies, by herself, and was lonely and bitter and angry. And that's how I imagined her. And it was interesting going through these, because my feelings when I was reading these report cards was so different when I got like grade 3, 4, and 6, 7, 8 versus grade 5. Anything that was said in it instantly triggered my stress system. And there was things that she said, it was interesting because stuff that like I was always really high level math, loved to read, really took care of my notes, tried so hard on everything, which I now learned was because I didn't believe I was good enough. And I didn't believe, like, I was worried about perfectionism as well. I was afraid I was going to make a mistake. So I uber did everything. And her comments as reading through it hit me hard when I was going through it. I was like, oh my God, this is why, like, she used these words. She wrote like, carelessness has been the main reason for a drop in mathematics. And my unit test showed a lack of competency. And I'm thinking, had she actually paid attention to who I was, but I probably was somebody different in her class. All of my other report cards were talking about how I tried so hard, how I was so engaged, how diligently I took care of my notes, how much work I put into things, how ferocious of a reader I was, how high level of math I was. And it was just fascinating reading hers. When I read hers, all I saw as well were all the negatives. And though that was like last week, now going through the report cards to prepare for this podcast, I actually saw that there were some things that she did right in that report card that were very similar to other teachers, but it was her word choice. like careless. If you knew anything about me, like that word hits hard. I was not careless. In fact, I was worried about being careless because if I was careless, I was worried I would get negative attention. And so I uber diligently did things and just lacks, like shows a lack of competency. Like I tried so hard in everything I do to be called non-competent in something was just hits hard. And that's where this first part that I did want to talk about is how when you have a child that is highly sensitive, who is empathic, who feels people's emotions, who can see things, they can feel the tension, the anger, the like the word choices that somebody does use can hit somebody that is highly sensitive way harder than somebody who's like, you know, you could say whatever to them and they're like, yeah, it don't matter, right? Different kids, different personalities, right? I have two different kids. One of my kids, highly sensitive to any words that you say, very similar to me. And then I have another one where everything just rolls off his back. He's like, sure, okay. So very different kids. And those things can really affect a child as to how that teacher speaks. So that I guess is one thing is in hindsight, I wish that I had been prepared a little bit more. I didn't know about highly sensitive children until I was older, an adult and had kids myself. I'm going to write myself here a note that I am going to add the highly sensitive child book by Elaine Aron, Dr. Elaine, Elaine, Aron, Aaron. I'll put that in the show notes. But that book was very eye-opening for me. And it was fascinating when I read that book. I liked the child book. I originally actually had the adult book and it didn't really hit me as much. But when you're highly sensitive, the amount of things that you're sensitive to as a child, because they're all your first, you eventually put up walls and adapt to things as you're older, not always in the best way. So the child book hit me. I was like, oh, that was me as a kid. That was me as a kid. And when I was listening to it, I did it on audio with my kid and I just be feeding my kids breakfast and it would be on and my kids would say, hey, I do that. Or the other would be like, hey, that's me. And really understanding that sensitive part of your child will understand sometimes when you talk or meet a teacher and you see maybe sometimes words they use or the way that they express themselves. As adults, it may not hit us as hard as sometimes it does with kids. I do know as well that one of my kids, I'm debating if I should say this out loud or not. Okay, it's going to help you, so I will. He was grade 1 and he had wet himself twice in that year. This is a child who never does. Like this was just, it was so out of character. And I realized he was afraid of his teacher. And I saw later on, like she would like totally strip kids, like just yell at them, just tear a strip off of them. As other kids were walking by in the hall and not even caring who was around, she was like belittling these kids and saying stuff to them. And my child was so afraid of her that the twice that it did happen, he had asked to go to the bathroom. Well, once he asked and she said, I'm in the middle of something, you wait. And so he waited and then he couldn't hold it anymore. And it was so embarrassing for him and so hard for him. And the other time was he was actually afraid to ask her because she was yelling. And like, so when things like that are, I mean, you know, your parents, when we're getting into these things, the thing I think that I wish that for me happened as a child was that I know that it was very different when I was a child. You still respected all your teachers and all of that. But nowadays, I'm actually telling my kids about how these are the teachers going through stuff in their own. I've been really teaching my kids about how when somebody is saying things in certain tones or getting upset frequently with many people, then it is often something that they are themselves struggling with. And I start teaching them the coping skills to be able to handle that and manage that. And And if that means too that there's certain days where they need a break from school when they were in school, I would give it to them. Just be like, yeah, why don't you just get a break from that teacher today? Because it's not your fault. It's something that they're struggling with. And depending on the school as well, um, the principal is no longer there at that school that they were in, and that principal was so unsupportive to all the teachers. You would just see the energy decrease in the teachers and their light of the things that they wanted to do because the principal wouldn't let them or allow them, pretty much clip their wings. And these teachers, I'm just hoping and praying that they're all recovering now that that principal is not there. So certain things were not addressed that should have been addressed. And there's only so much that you can do when your kids are in a school system. So it's more about really teaching your kids and giving them tools and the strategies and the outlets. And if they didn't have outbursts and all of a sudden they have these outbursts in a certain grade, that's where it may not even be about the child. It could be either about other kids in the class that they're struggling with, or the teacher, or all of the above. So diving into those other things is really something that I would highly suggest. And that book, Highly Sensitive Child, is, oh my gosh, it was so eye-opening in understanding my own sensitivities, but also the sensitivities of my kids in different ways. So that is one thing. When I was reading it, I was like, ooh, being a highly sensitive child and the words this teacher was using, I can absolutely see why I struggled in that grade, because it was such a different tone. Even though in it, she said she is a delight to have in class, but the energy and the tone of the words that she used in all of her descriptions were pretty critical on things. And sometimes, yes, those critical teachers are the ones that teach us lessons and get us out of our comfort zone and really figure some things out. But there's also that negative side to it. And that's where we can be supporting our kids as well on that side. So the second part of diving into this, which I think will be very eye-opening for many of you, was the commonality in certain things that were written in this report card. Now, I was like this straight A, really smart kid. And so most of my marks were A's, like everything. There's the odd time I'd get like a B, or like we had goods and very goods. And I was mostly in the very goods for pretty much everything most of the time. And they're very glowing report cards. But fascinatingly, they all would talk about how voracious of a reader I was, how verbally I could express myself so much. But in the language arts of the written, there were things I'll just write down. There's different things. I wrote some that certain teachers said. Written language needs more care in dividing paragraphs into sentences rather than writing one very long sentence. Must try really hard to think clearly and write carefully when doing comprehensive exercises. Her written expression, while mature in vocabulary and sentence structure, lacks detailed development at times. And it was interesting because as I started looping these along, these started in grade 3. That's where I had my report cards up until. Like my reading, my writing, my understanding of like words and vocabulary and verbally expressing them was great, but getting them on paper was tough. And this is where I've learned a lot in the last year, and this is who I'm actually starting to learn all the executive functioning information from, is Tara Sumpner. Tara Sumpner, T-E-R-A. Her Instagram is phenomenal. She and her book, Seeds of Learning. So she is a speech and language pathologist. And reading her book, I had no idea all of the different ways that our brain, all of the different processes that need to happen in order to read, in order to verbally say what you've read, and in order to then write them down on paper. There's so many different things. So there's different things of like, so when we think of dyslexia is where they are struggling with the symbols. So what the symbols look like to them, either visually on paper or for them to write them on paper. Two different processes, right? Those are two different processes. So they may be able to read them, but they may struggle to actually write them on paper, or they may be able to write them on paper, but struggle to read them. But if they're struggling to read them, then it's hard to put them down on paper because they don't actually know what they all look like. So that's just, that's the symbol recognition. There's the phonological part in being able to hear sounds understand sounds when somebody is saying them, how to be able to relate like a letter with a sound and being able to recognize those. Like there's so many deep, like you can go deep into this. Her book, Seeds of Learning, it's not that big. When I was reading it, saying to my husband in bed, I'm like, I need a friggin' dictionary just for all of these like phonological processing and just all of the different words. I needed a dictionary to keep going, which one was this again? Which one was this again? It did hurt my brain a little bit to read it, but what I came out after reading that book was understanding that one of my kids cannot get the original, like get anything creative written down on paper, even his thoughts of things that are like factual. The starting of writing it down on paper is such a struggle for him. And that's a part of the processing of the languaging, like the development of stories. And that is a different process to reading a book, to verbally telling you things. And so when I'm looking at this again, and so after what I've just told you, I'm going to read again what my report card said. So, and think about this. I was a voracious reader and I still had A's and very goods. But I do remember in school, often I felt I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I can't do this. Why is this so hard for me? I do know as well that I worked way longer than any of my friends on studying and learning the information and writing it all down. And I'm thinking now that I had a bit of either an auditory processing struggle. So that's an APD, auditory processing disorder, where one of my kids has dysgraphia and the other one struggles to get ideas on paper. So dysgraphia, which is interesting. Dysgraphia is where you struggle to write sentences, paragraphs, sometimes words on paper. So they may even struggle. So dysgraphia comes in different degrees. So there's kids with dysgraphia I've seen that can't even write on a line and even write it in between the like the lines on papers, their letters just go all inside outside. Like kids in grade 5 that should know all of the letters, that maybe can read at ridiculous rates and levels, but getting the words actually on paper, they can verbally tell you it. They might even verbally be able to dictate the words to you, but they may not be able to write the words on paper. And that's a different brain process. So with dysgraphia, my son can actually write like college level words. He can do words, but his writing is so tiny, so small. And it hurts his hands, his fingertips. So kids with dysgraphia too may struggle with zippers, may struggle with tying shoes, may struggle with like those cutting foods and stuff. They may have very strong hands, but not necessarily the fingertip fine motor skills with their fingertips. They may struggle with Lego, getting them like off, like apart and stuff. Through doing it and that, they strengthen them and it can come along, but they may always struggle with getting the words down on paper. So like my son, it's always like, it looks like a run-on sentence, no punctuation, no grammar, run-on sentence when he's doing a paragraph. And it's short because it takes so much brain power for him to even get that on there. They've also said too that his brain just goes so fast that he can't get everything on paper because his brain's like way steps ahead than his hand can write. And if we read mine, I'm looking into this. So written language needs more care in dividing paragraphs into sentences rather than writing one very long sentence, right? So these are skills that we may struggle with, and then through work, we may be able to work through, but some kids may not even be able to get there, or they're like way grades behind. But like my son in school would just say, I'm not doing it. Teacher would be like, can you write more? He's like, no. And he's not yelling or fighting or agreeing, but what are they going to do? Right? Like, it's like, no, like you need to do it. He goes, no, I'm not going to. And then he'd just open his huge chapter book and start reading. And they're like, I don't know what to do with this kid. And we realized later that he can't write these things down. I was speaking with, I have a couple of neighbors actually where their kids are struggling with one thing or another. One struggling with reading. The other one is can't write anything down. And they figured out it actually wasn't even auditory processing. It wasn't speech language issue at all in this child. This child's a voracious reader. What they struggle with is the visual tracking. So their eyes actually can't even see anything peripheral. So they can't even almost see a full word. So when they've been trying to learn words and stuff, which is fascinating that they can read books in one word. Well, they're still, I don't know. I thought this child was a ferocious reader. I know we've lent them tons and tons of books. But maybe once the words became bigger, they just didn't even have the visual span to be able to write it. But there's something with the tracking of their eyes. So they actually have special glasses and they're doing special exercises with their eyes to be able to help with the tracking. So it's really fascinating when you start reading these report cards. Another teacher said on mine, must try really hard to think clearly and write carefully when doing comprehensive exercises. And I did. I used to sit in my room for hours in order to study, and I would read and read and read something and then try to write it down. And I'd almost have to just copy the words. I almost basically just copied textbooks into my notebook. And it was so hard for me. Now that we have audiobooks, I consume audiobooks like there's no tomorrow, and I can tell you the information that they say verbally. And now I can actually verbally type it on paper, but that's because I'm auditorily taking in the information versus like I can read it and take it in as well. But when it's a textbook and I need to now figure out how to answer a test on it, I just like struggle and really getting those comprehensive exercises finished the way the teacher needed it done. And then the other thing, my written expression, while mature in vocabulary and sentence structure, lacks detail and development at times. So it's kind of fascinating where I'm now reading this. And yes, I was this straight A student, but what you find out with these kids that are very, very good and very ahead of things is that they also are very good at masking struggles that they're having. I now realize that it takes me way longer and so much more brain power and energy to be writing certain things than it does other people. I've been in classes now for copywriting and all of these things that I do in my job, and it is unbelievable. I'll be beside somebody and they're boom, write something down, and I'm like still on the first word. I'm just struggling to get it on paper, but I can verbally tell you the ideas, which is where I use AI a lot more now. And I'll verbally like put the ideas in point form and stuff, and then go into AI and go, okay, put this together for me. And it'll give me something, it'll give me a body to work with, to start with, and then I can finish it. Same thing with my one son too. The one that can't get anything started on paper, he'll go into AI and he'll be like, okay, give me 10 starting sentences for this. And it'll give him 10 starting sentences. And sometimes once he has a starting sentence, then he'll be like, okay, I like this. Now give me, the first paragraph of what we would do, and he'll start getting maybe it to help him as he's actually walking it through the steps to get the first paragraph or the second paragraph for him until he can start flowing with things. Once he's gone, he's good. Or it'll even say like, give me 10 writing points that I can write about on this. And then he'll break it down more into, all right, so I like this one point. What are 15 things that I could say about that? And it just starts giving him the ideas. And once he starts writing one idea down, then the rest starts flowing. So it's really that brain process of getting it started, getting it out there, getting it going. And these are the things where when a child is either getting like always struggling in this, or when they're actually really good, they could be masking up to a grade. Then you get to a certain grade where you just can't do it. And they're like, well, why can this kid now not do this? And the thing is they've been masking it and doing their best, but it actually is a big struggle for them. So these are things to start diving into. When they start getting into higher grades and they can't mask it anymore, that's where certain limiting beliefs start happening in them. That's where they the energy and the bandwidth that takes when they're younger to cover it up means they have less bandwidth to actually manage themselves in their class. When they're older and it becomes tougher and they can't hide it anymore, they start getting all kinds of feelings of frustration and anxiety and fear and failure and all of these things. And so without really understanding that it might just be that their brain is thinking differently. So if there's any like language arts or different things with your kid, I would highly suggest the book Seeds of Learning by Tara Sumner. I'll put that in the show notes as well. And just keep an eye of like recurring report card themes. Like go back and see where the recurring report card themes are. Is it in math? Because math has dyscalculia, which is where, so we have dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and dysprasia. Dysprasia is where they can't read. Dyscalculia is math. Dysgraphia is writing, so brain to handwriting. It can also be on a computer too that they can't. And dyslexia is like the symbol recognition of the words. And so dyscalculia is where they have no number sense, where like I have a friend, and if you tell her your phone number, she cannot type it into her phone. And she just like, there's stuff too where her husband will like, they'll be talking numbers for something and she'll throw something out there and he's like, where did you get that from? Like how, and it just, nothing, like the math just doesn't logically make sense in her brain, and it never has. And so that's where just the brain works differently. So somebody who specializes, like Made for Math, specializes in dyscalculia, and they help kids to help their brains understand how to get more number sense and how to start understanding that. So there's certain ways to be helping these kids, but first we have to understand what is happening and where they are struggling with it, which is why I'm so excited to be taking Tara Sumner's executive functioning class course and being certified by her. Like, oh man, this is like another big piece of the puzzle that I am adding to this Calm Night Strong Days and to all of my, I'm always learning, but like to the IFS and to all of my stress knowledge in stress systems and being able to help and support stress systems and hormones and gut and all these things. Adding this executive functioning piece is like going to just be like phenomenal. I cannot wait to be doing this course. Once this episode goes out, I'll already have started the course. So here's the thing. The school system, it's really broken, and teachers really don't, like I have so much respect for teachers. Teachers are overwhelmed. They don't have the supports in classrooms. I mean, here they're taking out EAs, they're taking out any of the special eds, they're taking out gifted programs, they're taking out all of the things for these kids that have different brains or learning struggles and putting them all in mainstream classes. There is no way that a teacher, unless they actually have a child that is experiencing any of these things, can focus on all the stuff that they have to do for their class and keeping their stress system functioning and managing, for them to also dive into this whole other education, into all of these other things, that it's impossible. That's honestly why I pulled my youngest from school. Was not anything against teachers, but I didn't think that the teachers needed to then learn everything that they needed to learn in order to help and support my son on top of the other 29 kids in the class. And because of my son's hearing, overhearing, and over like auditory processing and visual processing, because of how much he takes in a day, just being in a classroom environment in a school that auditorily bounces things off all the time, it was just too exhausting for him. His stress system couldn't handle being there, even if he had the best supports possible. It was too auditorily and visually stimulating for him, that he got into overwhelm just from that. So it's fascinating, all of these different stressors and different things out there, but I don't feel that we should be expecting, until these teachers get more support, until there are specialists that come in for all of these struggles that these kids have, these diverse, phenomenal kids who are going to change the world have. These kids who think outside the box, these kids whose brains think differently, which our world needs in order to make the changes that need to happen. Until that happens, I don't feel that expecting the school system to be able to solve all these problems um, is what's the word? Is reasonable, is possible, is I don't think it's right to do that to our teachers. And that, so this is where I think as parents, when we have these amazing kids that we have with these big emotions, um, it really is important for us to start reading through the lines on their report card. It's important for us to start listening more, um, to have that empathy, to stay in co-regulation, which is what I spoke of in the last, and to really be our best for our kids that we can be, and start learning and understanding more about what our individual child is struggling with, in order to start helping them more with helping them develop the skills and tools that they need, which will then in turn decrease their emotional outbursts, their big emotions. Still allowing them to have emotions and feel them in a way that is healthy and good for them, and allows them to grow and become a very solid, well-rounded person. But yeah, go and take a look at your kid's report card and see if there is something that is being repeated each year, and see if that's maybe a point that you can use to guide you on where to go to help your child next. So I hope this has been helpful for you. I know this is something that I wish I had learned years ago. I wish I'd had help with it as a child, but I honestly, like, this research is, a lot of the stuff is newer that's coming out. It wasn't out there when we were kids as parents. And so it's our job, I believe, as parents, to start learning it ourselves in order to help them more. Because the information is now out there with how much we can just dive into all of these courses and learnings and learn from people all over the world that do specialize in it, because the odds are in your area, there's not as many people that do. So I'm here to help however I can. Let me know. I am very curious to hear what your kids' report cards, if you find anything, email me. Hop on a call too. I have these 30-minute calls that are in my calendar. They're not sales calls. They're really, I am really diving into this kids with big emotions, and I would love to learn about your kids. I would love to learn about you, where you're struggling, so I know how to best help you. And maybe in that 30 minutes call, I can give you some sort of guidance, some nugget to start diving into, or something that you can do to help your child as well as we're going through this. I do also have the Facebook group, the Kids with Big Emotions Facebook group. Link is in the show notes. That is where we are gathering more parents of kids with big emotions, so you realize you're not alone. And I can start learning more about your kids in order to support you as best as I can. My goal eventually is to start getting a paid group for something like $47 a month or something like that, where I can start actually teaching in it. I'm just working at the steps right now as I'm growing this. And getting it to where I can help you and bring all of this knowledge that I've had in 30 years of working in the health industry, working in stress systems, learning the IFS I've been learning, and now diving into executive functioning, and just marrying everything together with my all of the knowledge that I have in order to help you not go through the struggles I have, and just to become stronger and help these kids change the world. So excited to have you join the group. Book a call with me if questions. If there's anything that you feel I'm missing, absolutely let me know. I am here to support you, and I will do it the best that I can. All right, I will see you in the next episode. Wait, before you go, if you found this podcast valuable, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps others discover these insights too. And if you're ready to transform your sleep and stress management and would like to see if we are a good fit with one another, let's chat. The link to my calendar is in the show notes below. Let's connect and start your journey to calm nights and strong days now. Until next time, sleep peacefully and stay resilient.